Jonathan Pierce ate lunch the same way every weekday at the same time in the same corner booth, as if the world might tilt off its axis if he didn't. 12:30 p.m. sharp. The host at Hawthorne Grill didn't ask if he needed a menu. The waiter didn't ask how he was doing. They had learned over the years that Jonathan Pierce preferred efficiency over conversation, silence over warmth. He nodded once when the water glass was placed down, once more when the plate arrived. That was the extent of it. Outside the tall windows, downtown Chicago moved in restless layers. Horns, footsteps, snatches of laughter, sirens in the distance. Inside, everything felt padded and quiet, like sound had been trained to behave. Jonathan cut his steak with the same precision he used in boardrooms. Clean lines. No wasted motion. He chewed without hurry, without pleasure. Food was fuel. Nothing more. At 46 he had mastered this kind of life. No surprises. No attachments that required explanations. His calendar was color-coded. His staff anticipated his needs before he voiced them. His penthouse overlooked the lake, but he rarely stood at the windows long enough to notice whether it was calm or angry that day. People called him cold. Jonathan preferred the word focused. He had grown up learning that emotions were liabilities. You felt them, you lost ground. You trusted people, they disappointed you. Hunger, he had learned early, was solved by discipline. Loneliness was solved by work. So he worked. Pierce Holdings had started with one neglected property and a loan most people told him not to take. 20 years later, his name was etched into glass towers and legal documents thick enough to stop a door. Jonathan liked things that lasted. Concrete. Contracts. Numbers that didn't argue back. He took a sip of black coffee and checked his watch. 12:37. On schedule. Around him, other diners spoke softly, glancing his way and then away again. Some recognized him. Some only sensed the gravity. Either way, no one sat too close. Jonathan liked that. He liked that no one expected him to smile. The bread basket remained untouched, as it always did. Habit, not restraint. His mother used to tell him bread filled you up without giving you strength. She'd grown up counting slices. He'd learned to count minutes. A waiter approached, paused, then retreated without saying a word. Jonathan noticed the movement, cataloged it, dismissed it. He didn't look up. Outside, clouds thickened. The light shifted. The kind of gray that meant rain was deciding how serious it wanted to be. Jonathan finished half his plate and pushed it aside. He never finished meals. Leaving something behind made him feel in control. As if he was choosing abundance rather than chasing it. He reached for his napkin when he felt it. That faint pressure at the base of his neck. The sense that something had changed in the room. Jonathan glanced up. Across the restaurant, a woman near the window was staring outside, her hand hovering midair, fork forgotten. A couple at the next table had gone quiet. Even the hostess near the entrance stood frozen, eyes fixed on something beyond the glass. Jonathan turned slightly in his seat. Rain had begun to fall, streaking the windows in uneven lines. And there, just beyond the glass, stood a small figure too close to the building, as if the overhang offered more protection than it really did. A child. She was soaked through, her jacket darkened by water, shoes splashing in shallow puddles that reflected the restaurant's warm light. She wasn't knocking. She wasn't waving. She was just standing there looking in, watching plates pass from kitchen to table. Jonathan felt an unexpected irritation rise in his chest. The city was full of need. If he acknowledged every hungry face, he'd never get anything done. He turned back to his plate, jaw tightening slightly. Still, he cut his next bite slower than before. The rain intensified, drumming against the glass. The girl didn't move. Jonathan told himself it wasn't his concern. He told himself she'd leave. Someone always did. But seconds passed. Then minutes. And for reasons he couldn't name, Jonathan Pierce found himself watching the reflection in the window more than the food in front of him, uneasy in a way no balance sheet had ever made him feel. If you're the kind of person who notices quiet moments like this, the ones that don't announce themselves as important until it's too late, you might want to stay close. Sometimes, a single glance through a rain-streaked window is where everything begins. And sometimes it's worth sticking around to see what happens next. Because the girl outside had just taken a step toward the door. The rain didn't fall all at once. It crept in, testing the pavement first, then committing fully, drumming against the sidewalk hard enough to send people running for cover. Jonathan watched it through the window without realizing he'd stopped eating. The girl had moved closer to the door now. She stood under the narrow awning, shoulders hunched, water dripping from the ends of her sleeves. Up close, she looked smaller than he'd first thought. Thinner. The kind of thin that didn't come from skipping dessert but from missing meals altogether. She pressed her palms briefly to the glass, not leaving prints, just warmth that faded almost immediately. Jonathan looked away. This was how things started if you let them. A glance became a gesture. A gesture became an obligation. He'd learned long ago that the fastest way to lose control was to respond to emotion in public. Still, the room felt off balance. The hostess whispered something to a server. A man at the bar shook his head, murmuring to the woman beside him. No one stood up. No one opened the door. Everyone waited for someone else to act. Jonathan adjusted his cuff, irritation mixing with something else he didn't care to identify. "She's just a kid," someone said quietly nearby. Another voice replied, "It's not safe for her to be out there." Jonathan's fork hovered midair. He set it down, slower than necessary. Outside, the girl shifted her weight from foot to foot. One of her shoes was splitting at the toe, held together with silver duct tape that had gone dull with use. Her braids were neat in theory, but several had come loose, frizzing around her face in soft, stubborn curls. She looked tired. Not sleepy. Tired in the bones. A memory brushed past Jonathan's mind, standing in a grocery store as a boy, staring at a display of oranges his mother wouldn't buy. He hadn't asked. He'd learned early not to. Wanting things didn't make them appear. He pushed the thought away. The door opened. A rush of cold air swept into the restaurant, sharp and wet, carrying the smell of rain and car exhaust. The girl stepped inside, hesitating just past the threshold, as if unsure the floor beneath her was real. "Hey, sweetheart," the hostess said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Are you here with someone?" The girl shook her head. She didn't speak. She just looked around. Her gaze skimmed the tables, the plates, the half-eaten meals. It lingered on bread baskets, on glasses of juice, on steam curling up from bowls of soup. Not greedily. Carefully. Like she was memorizing. Jonathan felt that strange pressure again, heavier this time. "Do you need help finding your parents?" the hostess asked. The girl's eyes flicked toward the window, then back. "They're busy." The answer was practiced. A man near the door cleared his throat. "You can't just." "I know," the girl said quickly, cutting him off. Her voice was soft but steady. "I won't stay long." She took one step forward. The hostess glanced around, uncertain. Her eyes landed on Jonathan. It happened often enough that people deferred to him without thinking. Authority clung to him. Money did that. So did silence. Jonathan noticed the look and frowned. He hadn't agreed to anything. The girl followed the hostess's gaze. Their eyes met. For a split second, Jonathan saw confusion cross her face. Then something else. Recognition maybe. Or hope. Or hunger sharpened into decision. She started toward him. Jonathan straightened in his seat. This was absurd. He wasn't a solution. He wasn't a shelter. He was a man trying to eat lunch. She stopped beside his table, close enough that he could see the faint scar above her eyebrow, the way her hands trembled just slightly at her sides. Up close she smelled like rain and cheap soap. "I'm sorry," she said, looking down at the edge of the table instead of his face. "I won't bother you." Jonathan opened his mouth to respond. To tell her to step back. To ask the hostess to handle it. Before he could, her stomach betrayed her with a soft, unmistakable growl. Her shoulders sagged just a little. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet restaurant. Jonathan felt something crack. Not break. Just shift. She looked up then, finally meeting his eyes. There was no pleading in her expression. No performance. Just a child doing the math in her head, weighing embarrassment against hunger, deciding which one she could survive. She inhaled as if bracing herself. And when she spoke, her voice carried a word Jonathan hadn't heard directed at him in decades, a word that would land heavier than any accusation ever could. Daddy? The word slipped out like it had been waiting, light and fragile and completely wrong. Jonathan didn't respond at first. He just stared at her, the fork still in his hand, suspended halfway between plate and mouth. The restaurant seemed to inhale all at once, then hold it. I'm so hungry, the girl continued, her voice barely louder than the rain tapping against the windows. Can I eat with you? Time slowed in a way Jonathan hated. The kind that forced you to feel every second instead of letting it pass unnoticed. Daddy. The word scraped against something old inside him. Something he'd sealed off so thoroughly he'd almost convinced himself it had never existed. I'm not your... His voice came out sharper than he intended. He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Where is your mother? The girl flinched just a little as if she'd expected the sting. She hugged her arms around herself, wet sleeves pressing against her sides. She's working, she said. She works nights. I walked here because the shelter food ran out. Shelter. Jonathan felt his throat close. He hated that word. It smelled like institutional floors and low expectations. Like places people went when systems failed them and then pretended they'd done enough. The hostess stepped forward, eyes wide. Sir, I'm so sorry. She shouldn't be. It's fine, Jonathan said, the words surprising even him. The hostess froze. The girl looked up, eyes wide. It is. Jonathan exhaled slowly. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, the one no one had ever used. Sit. For a second, the girl didn't move, like she was afraid the invitation might disappear if she accepted too quickly. Then she climbed onto the chair, careful, quiet, feet dangling above the floor. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Jonathan slid his plate toward her. She stared at it. You can eat, he said. Are you sure? She asked. Not hopeful. Cautious. He nodded. Only then did she reach out. She didn't grab. She didn't rush. She cut the steak into tiny pieces with the side of her fork, chewing slowly, deliberately. Every movement suggested rules learned the hard way. Don't waste, don't choke, don't make a mess. Jonathan watched, something twisting in his chest. The bread basket sat between them. He noticed her eyes flick to it, then away. She didn't touch it. Go ahead, he said. She hesitated. Then took a single roll, breaking it in half and setting one piece aside like she was saving it for later. Jonathan felt a strange pressure behind his eyes. What's your name? He asked, needing to anchor himself in something practical. Layla, she said after swallowing. Layla Brooks. How old are you? 7. Almost 8. She straightened slightly at that. I'm good at math. I believe you, he said, surprising himself again. She smiled, quick and shy, then went back to eating. The room around them slowly resumed its low hum. Cutlery clinked. Conversations restarted in cautious whispers. The hostess retreated, though she kept glancing over like she expected the moment to shatter. Jonathan ordered another plate. Then soup. Then juice. Layla drank the juice carefully, wiping her mouth with her sleeve when she thought he wasn't looking. Thank you, Daddy, she said softly. The word hit him harder the second time. I told you, he said, keeping his voice steady. I'm not. I know, she said quickly. You just look like him. He paused. Like who? My daddy, she said, eyes on her soup. I don't remember him much. But my mom says he didn't like to talk either. Jonathan said nothing. When she finished eating, she sat back, hands resting on her stomach, relief loosening her shoulders. For the first time, she looked like a child instead of a problem. Jonathan checked his watch. He was late. For the first time in years, it didn't bother him. I'll get you home, he said. Layla looked up, eyes shining. Will I see you again? Jonathan stood, pulling his coat on with movements that felt heavier than usual. He didn't answer her question, because as he watched her climb down from the chair, he realized something unsettling. This wasn't pity. And whatever it was, it had already begun to follow him. Jonathan paid the bill without looking at the total. The numbers blurred together anyway. His attention was fixed on Layla as she stood beside the table, hands clasped behind her back, rocking slightly on her heels. She looked full now, not stuffed, just steadier, like something essential had been put back where it belonged. He shrugged into his coat and glanced toward the hostess. "Can you call a cab?" "Of course, Mr. Pierce," she said quickly, relief flashing across her face. Layla's eyes widened. "A real cab?" "Yes," Jonathan said. "A real one." She nodded, solemn, like this was a responsibility she intended to respect. They waited near the entrance. Rain rattled against the glass doors, louder now, impatient. Layla leaned close to the window, tracing a finger along a droplet as it slid down. "Do you come here every day?" she asked without turning around. "Yes." "Same food?" "Usually." She considered that. "That sounds boring." Jonathan almost smiled. Almost. The cab pulled up in a spray of water. The driver glanced back, clearly surprised to see Jonathan Pierce holding the door for a small child. Jonathan handed Layla a folded napkin with his business card tucked inside. "Give this to your mother." Layla took it carefully, like it might tear. "Okay." She paused, one foot inside the cab. "You didn't answer me." Jonathan met her eyes. "Answer what?" "Will I see you again?" The driver cleared his throat. The rain kept falling. Jonathan felt the familiar instinct to retreat, to offer something vague and untraceable. "I don't know," he said honestly. Layla nodded once, accepting it. "That's okay." The cab drove off, taillights bleeding red into the rain. Jonathan stood there longer than necessary, the quiet of the restaurant pressing in on him now that the moment had passed. Then he turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft, final sound. The next day Jonathan ate alone again. Same booth. Same order. Same silence. And yet something was wrong. He noticed the bread basket immediately. It hadn't moved, but it felt louder somehow. Accusatory. He cut into his steak and stopped halfway through the first bite. The meat tasted fine. Perfect even. But his jaw tightened as he chewed, irritation rising without a clear target. He told himself it was nothing. Just a disruption to routine. Still, when he left, he glanced toward the window without meaning to. The sidewalk was empty. 2 days passed. Then 3. Jonathan told himself the encounter had been a fluke. A convergence of rain, timing, and misplaced familiarity. He didn't return to the shelter across the street. He didn't ask his assistant to look into it. He didn't Google Layla Brooks. He had learned over decades that curiosity was a doorway. You stepped through and things followed you back. On the 4th day it rained again. Jonathan was already seated when he felt it, that same pressure at the base of his neck. He didn't look right away. "Hi," a small voice said near the table. He closed his eyes briefly. Layla stood there, jacket damp but not soaked this time. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't apologizing. She just waited. "You're not supposed to be here," Jonathan said. "I know," she replied. I came to say thank you again." "For what?" "For yesterday. My mom cried when she saw the card." Jonathan stiffened. "What did she say?" "She said you were important." Layla frowned slightly. "She didn't say why." Jonathan nodded, heart thudding harder than it should have. Layla shifted her weight. "I'm not hungry today." He studied her face, searching for signs he didn't know how to read. "Then why are you here?" She shrugged. "I thought maybe you'd like company." The words settled between them. Jonathan glanced at the empty chair across from him. It had never looked so visible. "Sit," he said again. This time she didn't hesitate. They didn't talk much. Layla sipped water. Jonathan ate less than usual. It felt strange and unbalanced, like walking with a new rhythm. When it was time to leave, Layla hopped down and looked up at him. "I only come when it rains," she said quietly. "Why?" Jonathan asked. She gave a small, knowing smile. "People are nicer then." She slipped out before he could respond, disappearing into the gray afternoon. Jonathan stood there, the echo of her words lingering in the space she'd left behind. For the first time in years, he wondered what else he'd missed, on all the days the sun had been shining. Jonathan didn't see Layla again for nearly a week. Not because he stopped looking. He told himself he hadn't noticed the weather report on his phone. that the way his eyes kept drifting to the windows during meetings meant nothing. Still, every afternoon around noon, his attention thinned, stretched toward the street below as if something unfinished was waiting there. On the sixth day, clouds rolled in low and heavy, the kind that dimmed the city without warning. By the time Jonathan reached Hawthorne Grill, rain had already begun to fall. Layla was sitting on the curb across the street. She had her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them, chin resting on the fabric of her jacket. She wasn't watching the restaurant this time. She was watching the shelter entrance, counting people as they went in and out. Jonathan stopped short. For a moment he considered walking past, pretending he hadn't seen her. The instinct was automatic, well-practiced. If he didn't engage, nothing would escalate. But then she looked up. She saw him immediately. Her face brightened, just a fraction, restrained but unmistakable. She didn't wave. She didn't run over. She just stood and brushed rain from her sleeves as if preparing herself. Jonathan exhaled slowly and crossed the street. "You're not inside," he said, more observation than accusation. "They don't let kids wait in the lunch line," Layla replied. "They say it makes people uncomfortable." Jonathan frowned. "Where do you eat?" "Usually at school. Or at night when my mom's off." She shrugged. Today they ran out early. The casual way she said it unsettled him. He held the door open for her, ignoring the curious looks from passers-by. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them, the smell of food sharp and familiar. They took their usual places without discussion. Jonathan ordered before she could speak. "Soup today," he said. "It's cold." Layla smiled. "I like soup." As she ate, Jonathan noticed new details. A bruise blooming faintly along her forearm, yellowing at the edges. The way she flinched when a plate clattered nearby. How she sat angled slightly toward the exit, always aware of escape routes. "How's school?" he asked. Layla shrugged. "Okay." "That usually means not okay." She considered him for a moment, then nodded. "I'm slow at reading." The other kids laughed. "My teacher says I'll catch up, but she talks like she doesn't believe it." Jonathan felt an unexpected heat in his chest. "You're good at math," he said. "That matters." Layla's eyes lit up. "It does." "Yes." She returned to her soup with renewed focus, as if the words had fed her too. Jonathan leaned back, watching the steam rise. "Your mother works nights," he said. "Where does she work?" "A nursing home," Layla replied. "She comes home tired. Sometimes she falls asleep in her shoes." Jonathan pictured it without effort. "What's her name?" he asked. Layla hesitated. "Danielle." The name landed softly, without recognition. Yet something about it echoed faintly in his mind, like a sound he'd heard once and forgotten. "She says I'm strong," Layla continued. "But I think she just says that so I don't cry." Jonathan nodded. He understood that kind of strength. When they finished, Layla wiped her mouth carefully and slid off the chair. "I should go," she said. "They don't like it when I'm late." "Late for what?" "For being invisible," she said simply. The word struck him harder than she seemed to realize. Outside, the rain had eased into a drizzle. Layla stepped onto the sidewalk, then turned back. "Will you be here next time it rains?" she asked. Jonathan hesitated. The honest answer rose to his lips before caution could stop it. "Yes." She smiled, small and certain, then walked away. Jonathan remained where he was, watching her disappear into the crowd. For the first time, the question in his mind wasn't why she kept coming. It was why she felt so familiar, and why that thought unsettled him more than anything else. Jonathan told himself he had drawn a line. It was a thin line, barely visible, but it existed. Lunches only. Public places. No questions that opened doors he didn't know how to close. He wasn't responsible for fixing systems or filling gaps that had existed long before Layla Brooks walked into his life. That was the story he repeated to himself as he left Hawthorne Grill that afternoon. Still, he slowed when he reached the corner. Across the street, the shelter's brick facade looked dull and tired, its windows clouded with grime and old notices taped crookedly inside. People moved in and out in quiet streams, men with hunched shoulders, women holding children too tightly, faces trained not to expect much. Jonathan stood there longer than he meant to. He checked his phone, then slipped it back into his pocket without reading anything. For once, there was nothing urgent pulling at him. No meeting. No call that couldn't wait. Against his better judgment, he crossed the street. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. A television murmured somewhere out of sight. A volunteer behind the desk looked up, surprise flickering across her face before professionalism took over. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for a child," Jonathan said, immediately disliking how that sounded. "Layla Brooks." The woman's eyes sharpened. "You family?" Jonathan paused. The word caught in his throat. "I'm a friend," he said finally. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward a hallway. She left already. Her mother picked her up early. Relief and disappointment collided in his chest. "Is she okay here?" he asked. The volunteer hesitated. "As okay as anyone is." Jonathan nodded, unsatisfied but aware he'd reached the edge of what he could ask. He left without another word. That night, his penthouse felt larger than usual. Too quiet. The city lights outside his windows glittered indifferently, millions of lives unfolding beneath him without pause. He poured a drink and didn't touch it. Instead, he sat at the kitchen island, staring at nothing, replaying Layla's voice in his head. The way she'd said invisible, like it was a role she'd learned to perform. He slept poorly. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He arrived at work early. Not to get ahead, but to distract himself. Meetings blurred together. Numbers failed to anchor him the way they usually did. At noon, his assistant mentioned lunch, and Jonathan waved her off without explanation. When rain began again just after 1, he felt it before he saw it. By the time he reached Hawthorne Grill, Layla was already there, standing under the awning, counting droplets as they slid down the glass. She noticed him immediately. "You said you'd be here," she said, not accusing. "Just stating a fact." "So I am," he replied. They ate together quietly. Halfway through the meal, Jonathan did something reckless. "Do you need anything?" he asked. Layla paused, spoon hovering midair. "Like what?" "Shoes," he said. "Jackets. School supplies." Her face closed off instantly. Not angry. Guarded. "My mom doesn't like help," she said. "She says people take things back later." Jonathan nodded. "That's fair." She relaxed slightly. When they finished, Jonathan walked her back toward the shelter, stopping a block away. "This is far enough," Layla said. He respected that. As she turned to leave, Jonathan felt the line he'd drawn begin to blur. "Layla," he said. She looked back. "I won't disappear," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. She studied him carefully, then nodded once. "Okay," she said. "I believe you." She walked away. Jonathan stood there in the rain, aware that promises, even quiet ones, had weight. And for the first time, he wasn't sure whether he'd just protected himself, or crossed a line he could never step back over. Layla didn't come the next time it rained. Jonathan noticed immediately, which annoyed him more than her absence should have. He sat in his booth at Hawthorne Grill, napkin folded just so, coffee untouched, eyes lifting every few minutes toward the door. The rain outside was steady, polite even, the kind that usually brought her. Yet the space beside the entrance stayed empty. He told himself it meant nothing. Children were unpredictable. Life at a shelter didn't follow weather patterns. Still, when the waiter cleared his plate, Jonathan realized he'd barely eaten. He left early. The following week passed in fragments. Meetings, emails, contracts. All the things that had once filled him completely now felt like background noise. Every afternoon he found excuses to be near the windows. Every evening he caught himself thinking about duct-taped shoes and careful bites of bread. On the third rainy day he didn't go to the restaurant at all. Instead he crossed the street. The shelter doors were propped open, letting in the damp air. Inside, the atmosphere was louder than before, children's voices echoing off the walls, someone arguing softly at the desk, a volunteer calling out names. Jonathan stood awkwardly near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets, suddenly very aware of how out of place he looked. A boy ran past him, socks sliding on the floor. A woman scolded him gently. Life moved around Jonathan without asking permission. He approached the desk. "I'm looking for Layla Brooks," he said. The volunteer glanced at a clipboard. "She hasn't been in today." His chest tightened. "Do you know where she is?" The woman hesitated. "Her mom's been working extra shifts. They've been staying with a friend sometimes." Jonathan nodded, though unease crawled through him. "Is that safe?" The volunteer gave him a look that carried 100 unspoken truths. Safe is relative. He left with that phrase echoing in his head. That night, Jonathan dreamed of rain, of standing behind glass while someone knocked from the other side. When he woke, his sheets were twisted, his jaw clenched. The next afternoon, the rain came down hard, sudden and unrelenting. Jonathan was already on his feet before he realized he'd stood up. Hawthorne Grill buzzed with the usual lunch crowd, umbrellas dripping near the door. He scanned the room, then the street beyond. Nothing. He sat, waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Just as he reached for his phone, the door opened again. Layla slipped inside, breathless, jacket soaked through. Her braids were messier than usual, several strands sticking to her cheeks. She didn't look toward Jonathan right away. She went straight to the hostess and said something too quiet to hear. The hostess's eyes flicked toward Jonathan. Layla followed her gaze. Their eyes met. Relief flashed across her face before she could hide it. Jonathan stood without thinking. "You're late," he said. "I know," Layla replied. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here. I said I wouldn't disappear." She nodded. "I hoped you meant it." They sat. Layla didn't ask for food this time. She just stared at the table, fingers tracing the edge, shoulders drawn tight. "You okay?" Jonathan asked. She shrugged. "Sort of." That was new. She usually gave cleaner answers. Jonathan ordered anyway. When the food arrived, Layla pushed it around her plate without eating much. Her knee bounced under the table, a nervous rhythm. "Something happened," Jonathan said. Layla glanced up, startled. "How do you know?" "You're not hungry," he replied. "That's unusual." She stared at him for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth he could handle. "The lady we were staying with said I eat too much," Layla said finally. "She said I should be grateful for whatever I get." Jonathan felt heat rise in his chest. He kept his voice even. "Did she hurt you?" "No," Layla shook her head quickly. "Not like that. Not like that." The words sat heavy between them. "She told my mom I make messes," Layla continued. "My mom cried in the bathroom." Jonathan clenched his hand around his fork until his knuckles whitened. "You don't make messes," he said. Layla gave a small smile. "You sound like my mom." The sentence caught him off guard. They ate in silence after that. Layla finished only half her plate, then wrapped the rest in a napkin without asking. When it was time to leave, she lingered by the door. "Do you ever get tired of eating alone?" she asked suddenly. Jonathan opened his mouth to give a practiced answer. He stopped. "Yes," he said. Layla nodded like that mattered. She stepped out into the rain, then turned back. "If I stop coming," she said, "will you forget me?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. And for the first time since they'd met, Layla looked afraid of what he might say. Jonathan watched her face as the question hung between them. "If I stop coming, will you forget me?" He'd negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions without blinking. He'd dismantled companies with calm precision. Yet this simple, quiet question from a 7-year-old, left him oddly unarmed. "No," he said finally. "I don't forget things that matter." Layla searched his face, looking for cracks. Whatever she saw must have been enough. "Okay," she said. Then she stepped back into the rain and disappeared into the gray. Jonathan stayed where he was long after the door closed. Days passed without rain. Spring teased the city with sunlight and false promises. The sidewalks dried. Umbrellas vanished. And Layla didn't come. Jonathan returned to his routine, or something close to it. Same meetings. Same lunch hour. Same booth. But the rhythm felt off, like a song played just slightly out of tune. He found himself noticing children everywhere. At crosswalks, on buses, holding hands with parents or dragging behind them, distracted by something only they could see. He noticed how some kids talked too much and others barely at all. How some leaned easily into adults, while others kept careful distance. He wondered which kind Layla had been before life taught her otherwise. On the fourth dry day, Jonathan caught himself checking the weather again. The habit annoyed him. He closed the app and slid his phone away. This was temporary, he told himself. Patterns didn't mean permanence. Then the rain came back, hard and sudden, late one afternoon when the sky had looked perfectly clear an hour earlier. Jonathan felt the shift before he saw the clouds. He arrived at Hawthorne Grill early and took his seat, pulse quickening in a way he refused to acknowledge. He ordered coffee and stared at the door. Minutes passed. Then Layla appeared. She didn't come straight to him this time. She stood near the entrance, shaking water from her sleeves, eyes scanning the room like she was counting exits. Jonathan waited. Eventually she noticed him. Her shoulders loosened slightly, but she didn't smile. "You came," she said as she reached the table. "So did you," he replied. She climbed into the chair, but she didn't take off her jacket. She stayed perched on the edge, ready to leave. They sat in silence for a moment. "You're different today," Jonathan said. Layla shrugged. "My mom says I should be careful." "Careful of what?" "Of getting used to things." Jonathan nodded slowly. "That's not bad advice." Layla studied him. "Do you get used to people?" The question surprised him. "Not easily." She seemed relieved by that. "Good." Jonathan signaled the waiter and ordered soup. Layla accepted it with a nod but ate slowly, distracted. "You know," she said suddenly, "I used to think rain was bad." "What changed?" She tapped her spoon against the bowl. "Rain makes people stop. They notice stuff. When it rains, nobody tells me to hurry up." Jonathan considered that. Outside, rain streaked down the windows, blurring the city into watercolor shapes. Inside, the world felt briefly paused. "Do you have friends?" Layla asked. Jonathan almost laughed. "Not many." "Why?" "Because friends ask questions," he said. Layla smiled faintly. "I ask questions." "Yes," Jonathan replied. "You do." She ate a little more after that. Halfway through the meal, Layla leaned closer and lowered her voice. "I don't tell people this." Jonathan waited. "Sometimes," she said, "I pretend I'm not hungry so my mom doesn't feel bad." Something tightened in his chest. "That's very brave," he said carefully. Layla frowned. "My mom says brave is when you're scared but you do stuff anyway." "I'm not scared. I'm just used to it." Jonathan didn't respond. He wasn't sure how. When it was time to leave, Layla stood and adjusted her jacket. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "My teacher gave this to me," she said, handing it over. Jonathan unfolded it. A school flyer. Parent-teacher conferences. Danielle Brooks' name written at the top in looping ink. "My mom works that night," Layla said quickly. "I told my teacher she might not come." Jonathan looked at the paper, then back at Layla. "Do you want her there?" he asked. Layla nodded. "Yeah. But I don't want to make her tired." Jonathan folded the paper neatly and handed it back. "Sometimes," he said, "being there matters more than being rested." Layla looked at him like she was trying to memorize his face. "Can you come?" she asked suddenly. The question landed heavier than the rain. Jonathan didn't answer right away. Because this time, saying yes wouldn't just mean lunch. It would mean stepping fully into her world. And for the first time, Jonathan wasn't sure whether he was afraid of failing her, or afraid of how much he already cared. Jonathan didn't answer Layla right away. The question sat between them, quiet but heavy. "Can you come?" He folded his hands on the table, feeling the faint warmth left behind by her soup bowl. He had learned, over years of negotiation, that silence made people nervous. It made them fill gaps with assumptions. But Layla didn't rush him. She just watched, eyes steady, as if she already knew patience better than most adults. "What happens at those meetings?" he asked instead. Layla tilted her head. "They talk about my reading, and my tests, and how I'm doing with other kids." "And how are you doing with other kids?" Jonathan asked. She shrugged. I'm quiet. That makes them think I'm weird. Are you? Layla thought about it. Maybe a little. Jonathan nodded. That's not the worst thing to be. She smiled at that, small but genuine. The waiter came by to clear the plates. Jonathan barely noticed. His focus had narrowed to the girl across from him, to the careful way she crossed her arms, to the way she avoided looking at the door when it opened, like she didn't want to risk disappointment. You don't have to come, Layla said quickly, as if realizing she'd asked for too much. I was just wondering. Jonathan felt something tighten in his chest. If I did, he said slowly, what would you want me to say? Layla's eyes widened. You'd talk. Possibly. She smiled then, brighter than before. You could just listen. My teacher talks a lot. Jonathan almost laughed. All right, he said. We'll see. Layla nodded, satisfied with that answer. She didn't press. She'd learned not to. When they stepped outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. The streetlights reflected off the pavement in dull gold streaks. Layla pulled her hood up and stopped at the corner. This is where I go, she said. Jonathan hesitated. Do you want me to walk you? She shook her head. My mom doesn't like strangers knowing where we stay. That's smart, he said. Layla paused, then looked up at him. You're not a stranger. The words landed softly, but they stayed. Jonathan watched her walk away, small figure blending into the city, and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Responsibility, maybe. Or anticipation. Or both. The next time it rained, Layla didn't come. Neither did the time after that. Jonathan told himself it was coincidence. That life was unpredictable. That shelters moved people around. That children forgot. But on the third rainy afternoon, he found himself restless enough to leave the office early. Instead of going to Hawthorne Grill, he walked toward the shelter. The doors were closed. A sign taped to the glass read, Limited capacity. Check-in closed. Jonathan stared at it longer than necessary. He tried again the next day. And the day after that. No Layla. At night, he replayed their conversations. The way she'd saved half her bread. The way she'd said people were nicer when it rained. The way she'd asked him if he would forget her. He told himself this was temporary. That attachment was an illusion. That he could step back whenever he chose. Then his assistant knocked on his office door one afternoon. There's a call for you, she said. From a school. Jonathan frowned. Which school? She glanced at the note. South Haven Elementary. His chest tightened. He took the call. Is this Jonathan Pierce? A woman asked. Yes. This is Ms. Reynolds. I'm Layla Brooks' teacher. Jonathan closed his office door. Is something wrong? He asked. There was a pause on the line. I'm not sure who you are to Layla, Ms. Reynolds said carefully. But she listed your number as an emergency contact. Jonathan's pulse spiked. Where is she? She didn't come to school today, the teacher replied. Her mother hasn't answered her phone. Jonathan stood so quickly his chair rolled back into the wall. When was the last time you saw her? He asked. Yesterday afternoon, Ms. Reynolds said. She stayed late to finish a math worksheet. She seemed tired. Quieter than usual. Jonathan grabbed his coat. Thank you for calling, he said, already moving toward the door. As he stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed again. A new message. From an unknown number. It contained only 4 words. She's not with me. Jonathan stared at the screen as the elevator doors slid shut. And for the first time since he'd met Layla, fear, not caution, not restraint, took hold of him completely. Jonathan didn't wait for the elevator to reach the ground floor. He hit the stop button, stepped out when the doors cracked open, and took the stairs 2 at a time. His phone was still in his hand, the screen glowing with that single sentence. She's not with me. No name. No explanation. By the time he reached the street, the rain had started again, sudden and heavy, as if the city itself had been holding its breath. Jonathan flagged down the first cab he saw and gave the shelter's address without thinking. Traffic crawled. Horns blared. The cab smelled faintly of old coffee and damp upholstery. Jonathan stared out the window, jaw tight, replaying every detail he could remember. Layla's routines. The nights Danielle worked. The friend they sometimes stayed with. The way Layla had looked tired at lunch, quieter than usual. He told himself this wasn't panic. It was logistics. When something went missing, you gathered information and moved. Still, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The shelter was louder than he'd ever seen it. People clustered near the desk, voices overlapping. A volunteer argued into a phone. Someone was crying quietly near the wall. Jonathan pushed forward. "I'm looking for Layla Brooks," he said, louder than necessary. The woman at the desk recognized him immediately. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern. "We were about to call you. Where is she?" "We don't know," the woman said. "Her mother checked in last night. Layla didn't." Jonathan felt the words land like a physical blow. "What do you mean she didn't?" "Danielle came in alone," the woman explained. "She said Layla was staying with a friend." Jonathan's phone buzzed again. A known number. "She said she was going to eat." That was all it said. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Layla had never eaten alone at night unless something was wrong. "Where is Danielle?" he asked. The volunteer pointed toward a hallway. "Interview room." Jonathan didn't knock. Danielle Brooks sat hunched in a plastic chair, hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes snapped up when Jonathan entered, widening with something that looked like both relief and dread. "You," she said hoarsely. "Where is your daughter?" Jonathan asked. Danielle shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "I don't know. I thought she was with my cousin. My cousin thought she was with me." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. "When did you last see her?" "This morning," Danielle said. "She said she'd go to school early. She wanted breakfast there." Jonathan swallowed. "She never made it." Danielle covered her mouth, a broken sound escaping her. "I should have walked her," she whispered. "I should have." Jonathan forced himself to stay steady. "Does she have anywhere she goes when she's upset?" Danielle hesitated. "She likes quiet places, libraries, bus stops where no one notices kids." Jonathan's mind raced. Rain, hunger, quiet, Hawthorne Grill. He stood abruptly. "I know where she might be." Danielle grabbed his sleeve. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "Don't tell me later you tried." Jonathan met her eyes. "I won't." The restaurant was closing early because of the storm. Jonathan pushed through the doors, heart hammering, scanning every table, every shadow. Empty. He stepped back outside, rain soaking his coat, and looked around wildly. Then he saw her. Layla sat under the awning across the street, knees pulled to her chest, hair damp, eyes fixed on the window. She didn't look scared. She looked resigned. Jonathan crossed the street without feeling his feet hit the ground. "Layla," he said. She looked up slowly. "Oh," she said. "You came." "Why are you here?" he asked, keeping his voice calm with effort. "Why didn't you go to school?" She shrugged. "I was hungry, and my mom forgot to pack food. I thought maybe it was raining." Jonathan crouched in front of her. "You can't disappear like that." She frowned. "I didn't disappear. I waited." The word struck him hard. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She accepted it without protest. "Your mom is scared," he said quietly. Layla's eyes filled. "I didn't mean to make her scared." "I know," Jonathan said. "But being hungry isn't something you have to solve alone." She studied his face. "Then why do I always have to?" Jonathan didn't have an answer. He stood and held out his hand. "Come on. Let's go inside." Layla took it. Inside the restaurant, warmth wrapped around them. Jonathan ordered food without asking. As Layla ate, Jonathan felt the tremor in his own hands finally settle. But as he watched her, a new realization crept in, quiet, unsettling. Layla hadn't come here just because she was hungry. She had come here because, somewhere deep down, she believed this was the only place she was allowed to ask. And Jonathan knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this belief hadn't come from nowhere. Someone had taught her that. And whoever it was, he wasn't done fixing the damage yet. Jonathan stayed longer than he planned. The restaurant emptied around them, chairs flipped onto tables one by one. A server wiped the counter slowly, pretending not to listen. Layla ate carefully, like she was afraid the food might vanish if she rushed it. Jonathan watched her more than his plate. She hadn't said much since they sat down. Just small answers. Yes. No. Thank you. When she finished, she folded the napkin into a tight square and set it beside her plate. A habit, neat and deliberate, like something learned early. You okay? Jonathan asked. Layla nodded, then hesitated. Can we stay a little longer? He checked the time. It was late. Too late. Why? She glanced toward the window. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, lights blurring into long streaks on the pavement. It's quiet here. Jonathan felt the weight of that sentence. Quiet wasn't just sound. Quiet was safety. We'll go soon, he said. Your mom's waiting. Layla's shoulders tensed. Is she mad? No, Jonathan said quickly. She's scared. That's different. Layla stared at her folded napkin. She's always tired. Jonathan nodded. So are you. That made her look up. Adults didn't usually say things like that. They paid the bill and stepped back into the damp night. Jonathan held Layla's hand again, firmer this time. She didn't pull away. The ride back to the shelter was silent. Layla leaned against the window, watching the city slide past. Jonathan kept his eyes forward, but his thoughts were loud. He dropped her off with Danielle at the entrance. Danielle cried when she saw Layla, pulling her into a tight embrace. Layla stiffened at first, then relaxed, arms wrapping around her mother's waist. I'm sorry, Layla whispered. Danielle shook her head. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Jonathan stepped back, giving them space. This wasn't his moment. But as he turned to leave, Layla broke free and ran after him. Mr. Jonathan, she called. He stopped. She stood there, small and unsure, rain spotting her shoes. Are you coming back tomorrow? Jonathan smiled softly. I'll be around. Promise. He hesitated just long enough to feel it. I promise. She nodded, satisfied, and went back inside. Jonathan walked away with a strange ache in his chest. The next morning, Jonathan arrived early. He told himself it was about work. The shelter needed updates. There were donors to call, reports to review. Still, his eyes scanned the room as soon as he entered. Layla sat at a small table near the window, coloring. She looked up when she saw him, her face lighting up before she remembered herself and looked back down. Jonathan pretended not to notice. He hung his coat, spoke to the director, and poured himself coffee that tasted like burned water. When he finally sat across from Layla, she slid a piece of paper toward him. It was a drawing. A small girl under an awning. A man standing in the rain, holding out a coat. Jonathan swallowed. That's very good. She shrugged. It's from yesterday. Why did you draw it? Layla thought for a moment. So I wouldn't forget. Jonathan's phone buzzed before he could respond. Board meeting. 9:30 a.m. urgent. He glanced at the time. He couldn't miss it. I have to go for a bit, he said. Layla's face fell just slightly. Okay. I'll be back later. She nodded again, but this time without looking up. Jonathan stood, then paused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded card. Here, he said. It's the restaurant's number. If you're ever hungry and you don't know what to do, you can call them. Or, you can call me. Layla stared at the card like it was fragile. Really? Really? She tucked it carefully into her backpack. Jonathan left before he could change his mind. The board meeting dragged on. Numbers. Projections. Arguments that felt suddenly small. Jonathan checked his phone every few minutes. No messages. When the meeting finally ended, he headed back toward the shelter. Halfway there, his phone rang. The shelter's number. Jonathan, the director said, voice tight. We have a situation. What kind of situation? Child Protective Services is here. Jonathan stopped walking. Why? They received an anonymous report, she said. About neglect. Jonathan's chest tightened. About who? There was a pause. Layla. Jonathan looked at the street around him, at people moving through their days, unaware. I'm on my way, he said. As he hung up, one thought cut through everything else, sharp and unsettling. Someone had been watching. And whoever made that call didn't care what it would do to the little girl who only wanted to eat in peace. The shelter lobby felt different when Jonathan walked in. Too quiet. Too careful. A woman in a gray blazer sat near the front desk, a leather folder balanced on her knees. She looked up when Jonathan entered, eyes sharp but tired. Beside her stood a uniformed officer, hands folded loosely in front of him, posture relaxed but alert. Layla was nowhere in sight. Danielle stood against the wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes were red, her face pale. When she saw Jonathan, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "They won't let me see her," Danielle whispered. Jonathan nodded once, keeping his voice low. "Where is Layla?" "Interview room," the woman in the blazer said, rising. "With my colleague." Jonathan turned to her. "And you are?" "Rebecca Haynes. Child Protective Services." Jonathan extended his hand. "Jonathan Reed. I oversee donor relations here." She shook his hand briefly. "I'm aware." "Why is a police officer here?" Jonathan asked. Rebecca glanced at him. "Standard protocol when there's a report involving a missing child." Jonathan's jaw tightened. She wasn't missing. She was hungry. Rebecca studied his face. "That's one interpretation." Danielle made a small sound, half sob, half laugh. "You think I starve my child?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. "We're obligated to investigate." The report mentioned repeated food insecurity, lack of supervision, and emotional distress. Jonathan felt heat rise in his chest. "Who made the report?" Rebecca closed her folder. "Anonymous." "Of course. Can I see Layla?" Jonathan asked. Rebecca shook her head. "Not until the interview is complete." Jonathan glanced toward the hallway. Every instinct in him wanted to walk past her anyway. "How long?" Danielle asked. Rebecca hesitated. "As long as it takes." The minutes stretched. Jonathan sat beside Danielle on a plastic bench. The officer stood nearby, pretending not to listen. Jonathan focused on his breathing, on keeping his face neutral. "Did you tell anyone about yesterday?" Danielle asked quietly. Jonathan shook his head. "No." "Did you?" "No," she said. "I barely even told you." Jonathan frowned. "Then someone else saw her." Danielle swallowed. "Or someone heard her." Jonathan thought of the restaurant, the server, the people at nearby tables, the woman who'd looked at Layla a little too long. Or worse, someone closer. The door down the hall finally opened. Layla stepped out, holding a stuffed bear Jonathan hadn't seen before. A younger woman followed her, kneeling to whisper something before letting her go. Layla ran straight to Danielle. Her mother dropped to her knees, hugging her tightly. Layla pressed her face into Danielle's shoulder, fingers clutching the fabric of her coat. Rebecca watched, unreadable. "Layla," Rebecca said gently, "do you want to tell your mom what we talked about?" Layla pulled back slightly. Her eyes flicked to Jonathan, then back to Rebecca. "You asked me if I was hungry a lot," Layla said. "And what did you say?" Rebecca prompted. Layla shrugged. "Sometimes." Danielle's shoulders sagged. "We don't always have enough," she said, voice trembling. "But I try." Rebecca nodded. Layla also said she knows where to go when she needs food. Jonathan's stomach tightened. Rebecca looked at him. "She mentioned you." Danielle turned toward Jonathan sharply. "She said you feed her?" Rebecca asked. Jonathan chose his words carefully. "I bought her a meal." "What?" "After she'd been alone all day." Rebecca studied him. "Do you often spend time alone with her?" "No," Jonathan said. "I don't." Danielle's face drained of color. Rebecca closed her folder. "For now, Layla will remain with her mother. But we'll be opening a case." "What does that mean?" Danielle asked. "It means we'll be monitoring," Rebecca said. "Home visits. School check-ins." Danielle nodded numbly. Rebecca turned back to Jonathan. "And it means boundaries." Jonathan met her gaze. "Of course." As Rebecca and the officer prepared to leave, Layla tugged on Jonathan's sleeve. "Did I do something bad?" she whispered. Jonathan crouched to her level. "No. You told the truth." She frowned. "Am I in trouble?" He shook his head. No. She studied his face, searching. Promise? Jonathan hesitated. I promise, he said. Layla smiled faintly, reassured. But as Jonathan stood, Rebecca paused beside him. Mr. Reed, she said quietly so only he could hear. Children like Layla don't usually know where to go when they're hungry unless they've learned to fend for themselves. Jonathan swallowed. Rebecca's voice softened, but her words didn't. Whatever you think you're helping with, be careful. Attachment can complicate things. She walked away. Jonathan watched the door close behind her. For the first time he felt it clearly. This wasn't just about a hungry child anymore. Someone had drawn a line. And stepping over it now would come at a cost he didn't yet understand. Jonathan sat in his office that evening, the city lights stretched beneath him like a glittering battlefield. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets gleaming and slick. He poured a glass of scotch, but he didn't touch it. The amber liquid caught the light, reminding him of warmth he couldn't reach. Layla's words from earlier replayed in his mind. Children like Layla don't usually know where to go when they're hungry unless they've learned to fend for themselves. He hadn't thought of it like that before. Not fully. He'd always seen her as a child in need, a problem to solve, a hunger to satiate. But now it felt like something else. A warning. A truth he hadn't been willing to face. Jonathan's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She trusts you. He frowned. The words were short, almost cryptic. But the timing was too precise to be coincidence. Someone had been watching them. Or watching her. Maybe both. His gut tightened. The next morning he left the office earlier than usual. Not to check the shelter. He knew that route would be monitored. But to do something he hadn't done before. He traced the streets where Layla walked. Where she lingered. Where she found safety in the city's anonymity. He paused outside a small library she had mentioned once. A quiet place with high windows and polished floors. It smelled faintly of paper and dust, warm and safe. Jonathan leaned against the doorframe, watching. Children trickled in, volunteers bustling quietly, the librarian moving from shelf to shelf. He imagined Layla sitting somewhere in the corner, tracing her fingers along the pages of a book, shielding herself from a world that often overlooked her. A shadow moved nearby. Jonathan turned. A woman, mid-30s, coat buttoned tightly, umbrella dangling from one hand. She looked ordinary, but there was intent in her eyes. She was scanning the street as if searching for something, or someone. Jonathan's pulse accelerated. The woman noticed him. For a moment their eyes met. Recognition. Alarm. Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Jonathan clenched his fists. He knew he had to find Layla before the wrong person did. Inside the library, a small voice whispered from behind a corner. Mr. Jonathan? He froze. There she was. Rain-streaked, tired but alive. Her eyes brightened when she saw him. She slipped from behind the shelf and into his side. I knew you'd come, she said softly. Did anyone follow you? He asked immediately. Layla shook her head. I don't think so. Jonathan wasn't convinced. He led her to a table near the window. You need to tell me everything, everywhere you've been. Every place you feel safe. She nodded obediently. Okay. As Layla spoke, Jonathan realized how fragile her world was. Small routines, quiet escapes, hidden snacks. All systems she had built to survive. Each sentence she uttered, each careful detail, revealed a resilience forged by necessity. And yet, with every word, Jonathan felt a creeping weight. The anonymous messages, the CPS visit, the woman he saw outside. Something was converging and he couldn't yet see the full picture. When Layla finished recounting her week, Jonathan felt an icy knot in his stomach. Jonathan, she said, voice hesitant. Are you going to make me leave any of these places? He met her gaze. Her trust was a fragile thing, almost tangible. One wrong move and it could vanish entirely. No, he said firmly. Not unless it's unsafe. You deserve places that keep you safe even when the world doesn't. Layla's lips curved into a small, cautious smile. Promise. Jonathan held her gaze, thinking of Rebecca Haynes' warning, of Danielle's exhaustion, of the anonymous messages. The promise felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed, binding in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I promise," he said. The city outside blurred through rain-streaked glass, oblivious to the storm gathering inside this small library, where a child's safety and a man's conscience were suddenly inseparable. Jonathan knew without doubt that the next step, whatever it was, would force him to face not only the dangers outside but the ones he had long ignored within himself. And as Layla leaned slightly against him, trusting, fragile, yet unbroken, Jonathan realized that protecting her would demand more than meals, more than shelter. It would demand a reckoning with secrets, with people watching, and perhaps with himself. The faint echo of footsteps outside the library made him tense. He wasn't sure who was coming, but he knew instinctively that someone had followed them. And whatever was coming next would change everything. Jonathan didn't move when the footsteps paused outside the library. He counted his breaths instead. 1, 2, 3. Layla felt the shift in his body before he said anything. She straightened, fingers curling around the edge of the table. Her eyes flicked toward the glass doors, then back to him. "Is something wrong?" she whispered. Jonathan forced a calm smile. "Nothing yet." The doors opened. Cold air slid across the floor, carrying the smell of wet pavement. A man stepped inside, shaking rain from his jacket. Mid-40s. Clean shoes. Not rushed. His eyes scanned the room slowly, not like someone looking for books, but like someone checking exits. Jonathan's instincts tightened. The man approached the front desk and spoke quietly to the librarian. She nodded and gestured toward the children's section. Layla shrank slightly in her chair. "Do you know him?" Jonathan murmured. Layla shook her head, but her voice was thin. "I've seen him before." "When?" "Outside the shelter. And once near my school." "He doesn't talk." Jonathan's jaw set. The man walked closer, stopping a few shelves away. He pretended to browse, but his attention never left them. Jonathan stood slowly, positioning himself between the man and Layla. "Take your backpack," Jonathan said softly. "We're leaving." Layla obeyed instantly. As they passed, the man spoke. "Mr. Reed," he said casually. Jonathan stopped. "Yes." Jonathan replied, keeping his tone neutral. The man smiled, polite and professional. "You're hard to catch." "Who are you?" Jonathan asked. The man glanced at Layla. Maybe not the best place for introductions. Jonathan's muscles coiled. "Then you should leave." The man's smile didn't fade. "I work with families in transition. Community support services." Jonathan didn't believe a word. Layla tugged at Jonathan's coat. "I don't like him." "That's understandable," the man said gently. "Change can be scary." Jonathan stepped closer, voice low and firm. "You said you'd seen her before." The man shrugged. "Children notice faces. Adults notice patterns." "And what pattern do you think you're seeing?" Jonathan asked. The man leaned in slightly. "A little girl forming attachments outside approved channels." Jonathan felt heat flare in his chest. "She's a child. Not a case file." The man straightened. "Everything becomes a file eventually." The librarian cleared her throat nervously. "Is there a problem?" "No," the man said smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding." He turned back to Jonathan. "We'll talk soon." Jonathan didn't respond. He took Layla's hand and walked out without looking back. They didn't go to the shelter. Jonathan drove aimlessly at first, looping through side streets, watching mirrors, changing lanes for no reason other than instinct. Layla sat quietly, knees tucked to her chest, eyes fixed on the window. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "No," Jonathan said. "But we are being noticed." She frowned. "Is that bad?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially when people think they know what's best for you without asking." Layla considered that. "They do that to my mom." Jonathan nodded. "I know." He parked near a small park and cut the engine. The silence pressed in. "Layla," he said carefully, "has anyone ever asked you questions about me before today?" She hesitated. "Yes." His heart sank. "Who?" "The lady from CPS," she said. "And another man." "Not today." "Before." "When?" Jonathan asked. After the restaurant, Layla said. He said he wanted to make sure I was safe. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. What did you tell him? That you're nice, Layla said. That you listen. That you don't get mad when I'm hungry. Jonathan opened his eyes. Did he ask you to keep secrets? Layla nodded slowly. He said grown-up things get complicated if kids talk too much. Jonathan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Layla, he said gently, if anyone ever asks you to keep secrets about food, about where you go, or about me, you tell your mom. Or you tell me. She nodded, eyes wide. Okay. Jonathan leaned back, staring at the gray sky. The warning Rebecca had given him echoed louder now. Attachment can complicate things. He'd thought it was caution. He hadn't realized it was threat. That evening, Jonathan went home alone. His apartment felt cavernous. He paced, checked locks, stared at his phone. At midnight it buzzed. Unknown number. You're blurring lines. Jonathan typed back before he could stop himself. She's a child. The reply came instantly. Exactly. Jonathan stared at the screen, anger simmering beneath his ribs. He typed again. If you think intimidation helps her, you're wrong. This time the pause was longer. Then the message arrived. We're trying to prevent a situation you don't fully understand. Jonathan exhaled slowly. Neither are you, he thought. His phone buzzed once more. Tomorrow decisions will be made. Jonathan set the phone down. For the first time since meeting Layla, he felt the ground shift beneath him. Whatever was coming next wouldn't be subtle. And it wouldn't give him time to decide whether he was ready. It would decide for him. Jonathan barely slept. When morning came, it arrived gray and sharp, like the edge of a blade. He showered, dressed, and stood by the window longer than necessary, watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, decisions were already moving without him. His phone buzzed at 7:12 a.m. CPS case update, attendance required. No sender name. Just a location and time. 11 o'clock. Downtown office. He didn't reply. At 9 he drove to the shelter anyway. Danielle was in the common room, spooning cereal into a chipped bowl while Layla sat beside her, legs swinging slowly. Layla looked up when she saw him. Her smile flickered, quick, cautious, like she was checking whether it was allowed. Jonathan crouched in front of her. Hey, are we still okay? She asked quietly. The question landed harder than any accusation. We are, he said. But some people are asking questions. Layla frowned. The man from the library? Jonathan didn't lie. Yes. Danielle stiffened. What man? Jonathan explained in short sentences. No drama. No guesses. Danielle listened, jaw clenched, fear settling into anger. They don't get to scare her, Danielle said. They already have enough power. Jonathan nodded. That's why we have to be careful. Layla looked between them. Am I going to have to move again? Danielle's hand froze midair. Jonathan answered first. No one has said that. But they could, Layla said. Jonathan met her eyes. Only if they think you're unsafe. Layla thought about that. I am safe, she said firmly. I know where to go. Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. That's exactly what worries them, he said gently. The CPS office smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. Rebecca Haynes sat across from Jonathan in a small conference room. A legal pad lay open in front of her. The man from the library sat beside her, hands folded neatly. This is David Klein, Rebecca said. He consults on complex cases. Jonathan didn't offer his hand. Rebecca got straight to it. We've reviewed Layla's situation more closely. Jonathan waited. There's a pattern, Rebecca continued. Chronic food insecurity, unsupervised time, emotional reliance outside the family unit. Jonathan glanced at David. You mean me? David smiled faintly. We mean influence. I fed a hungry child, Jonathan said. Once. Rebecca nodded. And she sought you out again. Because she trusted me, Jonathan said. That's the concern, David replied calmly. Jonathan leaned forward. You're worried about the wrong thing. Rebecca's pen paused. Explain. You're worried about attachment, Jonathan said. You should be worried about why a child has to memorize safe places to eat. David's smile thinned. We can't fix everything at once. So you remove the variable you can control? Jonathan asked. Me? Rebecca exhaled slowly. We're recommending limited contact. Jonathan felt the room tilt. On what grounds? Until Danielle stabilizes housing and income, Rebecca said. Layla needs clear boundaries. Jonathan shook his head. You're punishing support. We're preventing confusion, David said. Jonathan stood. This is about liability. Rebecca didn't deny it. You're afraid that if something happens, Jonathan continued, you'll have missed warning signs. David met his gaze. We're afraid of escalation. Jonathan laughed once, humorless. She's 8. David's eyes hardened slightly. And vulnerable. Rebecca closed her folder. For now we're asking you to step back. Jonathan looked from one to the other. And if I don't? Rebecca held his gaze. Then we reassess whether your involvement is healthy. The words hung heavy. Jonathan nodded slowly. I won't disappear. David tilted his head. That would be wise. Jonathan turned to leave. Mr. Reed, Rebecca called after him. This isn't personal. Jonathan stopped at the door. Then stop making it personal to a child. He walked out before they could respond. That evening, Jonathan sat alone in his apartment again. He didn't drink. He didn't turn on the lights. At 8:03 p.m. his phone buzzed. A known number. You were warned. Jonathan stared at the screen. Then another message came through. Tomorrow, Layla will be evaluated for temporary placement options. Jonathan's breath left him slowly. Placement. Not monitoring. Not boundaries. Placement. He typed one word back. Where? The typing dots appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. Then the message came. That depends on how cooperative everyone is. Jonathan closed his eyes. For the first time, the possibility he'd been refusing to name settled fully into place. They weren't trying to help Layla. They were trying to move her. And if he made the wrong move next, he wouldn't just lose access. He might lose her. Jonathan arrived at the shelter before sunrise. The building was quiet, lights dimmed low, the hum of the vending machine the only sound in the hallway. He sat in his car for a long moment before getting out, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. He needed to be careful now. Every move mattered. Inside, Danielle was already awake. She sat at a table with paperwork spread in front of her, eyes rimmed red, hair pulled back without care. They're coming today, she said before Jonathan could speak. He nodded. I know. They said it's just an evaluation, she continued, voice flat. But they keep using words like options and contingencies. Jonathan pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Did they give you a time? 10, Danielle said. Rebecca. And the man. David. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Layla doesn't know, does she? Danielle shook her head. I didn't tell her. I didn't know how. At that moment, small footsteps padded down the hallway. Layla appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her backpack already on her shoulders like she was prepared to leave at any second. Jonathan stood instinctively. Morning, Layla said softly. Hey, he replied, forcing a smile. You're up early. I heard voices, she said. Her eyes moved between them, reading more than either adult wanted her to. Something's happening, isn't it? Danielle opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jonathan crouched in front of Layla. Some people are coming to talk. Just talk. Layla studied him. About me. Yes. Am I in trouble again? She asked. Jonathan shook his head. No. She looked unconvinced but nodded anyway. Rebecca and David arrived exactly at 10. They didn't knock. They never did. Rebecca carried her folder. David carried nothing at all. He smiled at Layla like he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Good morning, Rebecca said. Layla, we're just here to check in. Layla didn't respond. She slipped her hand into Jonathan's. Rebecca noticed. So did David. We'd like to speak with Layla privately, Rebecca said. Jonathan didn't let go. She doesn't like surprises. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. One of us can stay. I will, Jonathan said. David's smile tightened. That may not be appropriate. Rebecca glanced at him, then back at Jonathan. 5 minutes, she said. That's all. They moved to a small side room. Layla sat in a chair that was too big for her, feet swinging just above the floor. Jonathan sat nearby, silent, present. Rebecca asked gentle questions. School, friends, food, sleep. Layla answered carefully, like she was stepping across ice. Then David leaned forward. If you ever had to stay somewhere else for a little while, he said calmly, how would that make you feel? Layla froze. Jonathan's pulse spiked. That's not. It's hypothetical, David said smoothly. Layla's voice was small. Somewhere else, like where? David shrugged. A nice place. Quiet. Structured. Layla shook her head immediately. I don't want to go. Rebecca made a note. Why not? David asked. Layla's eyes filled. She glanced at Jonathan, then at her hands. Because people say, for a little while, and then they don't come back. The room went very still. Rebecca looked up sharply. Who told you that? Layla whispered, I've seen it. Jonathan felt his chest tighten painfully. David leaned back, studying her. You're very observant. Jonathan stood. This conversation is over. Rebecca hesitated. Jonathan. No, he said firmly. You crossed a line. They ended the meeting soon after. Rebecca promised follow-ups. David said nothing as he left, but his eyes lingered on Jonathan a second too long. That afternoon, Jonathan received an email. Subject, Temporary Placement Review, Internal. It wasn't addressed to him, but it included him. He read it once, then again. Layla Brooks, Potential Kinship Adjacent Placement. Non-familial adult with established rapport. Financial stability verified. Jonathan's hands went cold. They weren't just talking about removing Layla. They were talking about placing her with him. His phone rang immediately after. Rebecca's voice was tight. Jonathan, I need to know where you stand. He swallowed. On what? If Layla can't remain with her mother, she said, choosing each word carefully, would you be willing to be considered as a temporary guardian? Jonathan closed his eyes. This was the line. The one he hadn't wanted to see. If he said yes, he became the reason they moved her. If he said no, she would be moved anyway. I need time, he said. You don't have much, Rebecca replied. We're making decisions tonight. Jonathan hung up slowly. Across the room, Layla sat on the floor coloring. She looked up at him, sensing the shift. Mr. Jonathan, she asked, innocent and terrified at the same time, am I going to have to say goodbye? Jonathan opened his mouth. No answer came out. And in that silence, the future tilted, waiting for him to choose which kind of damage he was willing to live with. Jonathan didn't answer Layla right away. He sat down on the floor across from her, the hard linoleum cold through his trousers. He picked up one of her crayons and rolled it between his fingers, buying time he didn't have. I don't know yet, he said finally. But I'm not going anywhere. Layla nodded slowly, like she was filing the information away for later. Okay. That was all she said. No tears. No questions. Just acceptance that felt far too practiced for someone her age. Danielle watched from the doorway, her face tight with something close to shame. After Layla went back to coloring, Danielle lowered her voice. They're really thinking about this, aren't they? Jonathan nodded. Yes. Danielle pressed her palms to her eyes. I knew it. I knew the moment they showed up with folders instead of clipboards. This isn't your fault, Jonathan said. Danielle let out a brittle laugh. It's always the mother's fault. Jonathan didn't argue. He'd seen the way the system tilted, the unspoken assumptions that came with being poor, tired, and black. He also knew saying the truth didn't make it hurt less. I don't want her moved, Danielle said. Not again. Again? Jonathan asked gently. Danielle hesitated, then exhaled. When Layla was 5, there was a short placement. 3 months. They said it was temporary. Jonathan's stomach dropped. You never told me. I didn't want to, Danielle said. She came back quieter. Different. She stopped asking for things. Jonathan thought of Layla folding napkins, memorizing safe places, accepting hunger as normal. How did she end up back with you? He asked. I fought, Danielle said. I worked 2 jobs, slept on buses, did everything they asked. Jonathan nodded slowly. And now they're here again. Danielle looked at him, eyes sharp suddenly. If they take her, and if they ask you, what will you do? Jonathan didn't answer. That night he went home and didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the dark. The email replayed in his mind. Kinship adjacent placement. Temporary guardian. Temporary. Nothing about that word felt temporary. At 9:47 p.m. his phone rang. Rebecca. Jonathan, she said, skipping pleasantries. We need your decision. He closed his eyes. What happens if I say no? Rebecca paused. She'll likely be placed with a certified foster family, possibly outside the district. And if I say yes? Then Layla stays in her school, Rebecca said. In familiar surroundings. With me, Jonathan said. Yes. Jonathan swallowed. And her mother? Rebecca's voice softened just slightly. Danielle would retain parental rights. This would be temporary. Jonathan laughed under his breath. You keep saying that. Rebecca didn't respond. Why me? Jonathan asked. Because Layla trusts you, Rebecca said. And because you pass every check we run. Jonathan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You're asking me to be the reason she leaves her mother. I'm asking you to be the reason she doesn't lose everything else, Rebecca replied. He said nothing. Jonathan, Rebecca continued, we don't get perfect choices. We get the least damaging ones. After the call ended, Jonathan sat in the dark for a long time. Then he stood and walked to his bedroom closet. Behind tailored suits and winter coats was a locked metal box he hadn't opened in years. He knelt, turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside were documents. Old ones. Hospital records. A folded photograph. A little girl younger than Layla, sitting on a hospital bed. For in her arm. Eyes too big for her face. Jonathan picked up the photo, his throat tightening. I'm sorry, he whispered, though no one could hear him. The memory he'd buried pressed forward now, insistent and unforgiving. Another child. Another promise he hadn't been able to keep. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You don't want to repeat history. Jonathan's breath caught. He typed back with shaking fingers. What history? The reply came slowly. We know about Emily. Jonathan felt the room tilt. No one knew about Emily. No one. He stared at the screen, heart pounding, as a final message appeared. And we know what it cost you to walk away last time. Jonathan sank onto the bed, the photo slipping from his hand. This wasn't pressure anymore. It was leverage. And whoever was pulling the strings knew exactly where to cut. Jonathan didn't sleep at all. The sky was just beginning to pale when he drove back to the shelter, Emily's photo still burning in his mind. He hadn't taken it with him. He couldn't. Leaving it behind felt like locking a door he wasn't ready to open, but carrying it felt worse. Inside the shelter, everything looked the same. Fluorescent lights. Scuffed floors. The smell of instant coffee. And yet nothing felt the same. Danielle sat at the same table as the day before, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. Layla sat beside her, backpack on again. Always ready. Always prepared to leave. Jonathan felt something crack quietly in his chest. You look tired, Layla said when she saw him. So do you, he replied. She gave a small shrug. I didn't want to miss anything. Danielle looked up. They called me at 6 this morning, she said. They want me downtown at noon. Jonathan nodded. They called me too. Layla's eyes flicked between them. Is noon when I find out? Danielle swallowed hard. Yes, baby. Layla didn't cry. She just nodded and went back to tracing the zipper on her backpack. Jonathan knelt in front of her. Hey, no matter what happens today, this part doesn't change. What part? She asked. That I'm here, he said. And your mom is here. Layla studied his face carefully. Together or separate? The question hit with surgical precision. Jonathan didn't answer it directly. We're going to tell the truth. That's all we can do. Layla considered that. The truth makes grown-ups uncomfortable. Jonathan let out a quiet breath. You're not wrong. Downtown, the CPS building felt colder than before. Rebecca greeted them with professional calm. David was already seated, hands folded, expression unreadable. Layla sat between Jonathan and Danielle this time. Rebecca began. We've reviewed the evaluation and additional reports. Jonathan felt David's eyes on him. Based on current circumstances, Rebecca continued, we're concerned about instability. Danielle's hands trembled slightly. I'm doing everything you asked. We know, Rebecca said. But concern doesn't equal blame. Jonathan leaned forward. Then why does it feel like a verdict? Rebecca hesitated. Because the system moves faster than people. David cleared his throat. We need to minimize disruption. Layla spoke up. I don't like disruption. All eyes turned to her. David smiled. No one does. Layla looked straight at him. Then why do you keep causing it? The room went still. Rebecca glanced down at her notes, then back up. Layla, can you tell us where you feel safest? Layla didn't hesitate. With my mom. And when your mom is working? Rebecca asked gently. Layla's voice softened. Places where people don't yell. Where food doesn't feel like a favor. Jonathan's throat tightened. Rebecca nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. David leaned forward. Which is why we're considering a temporary arrangement that preserves continuity. Jonathan knew what was coming. Mr. Reed, David said, you've been identified as a potential placement. Danielle inhaled sharply. Layla's head snapped up. Placement. Jonathan spoke before anyone else could. Say it plainly. David met his gaze. If Danielle cannot meet certain benchmarks immediately, Layla would stay with you on a temporary basis. Layla's hand tightened around Jonathan's sleeve. Danielle shook her head. You're asking him to take my child. No, Rebecca said carefully. We're asking him to keep her from being moved farther away. Jonathan felt the trap close in. He stood slowly. Before I answer anything, I need to ask a question. Rebecca nodded. How did you know about Emily? Jonathan asked. David's expression flickered. Just for a moment. Rebecca stiffened. Emily? Jonathan's voice stayed calm, but it took everything he had. Someone used her name to pressure me. David leaned back. Background checks can surface unexpected history. Jonathan shook his head. Emily's records are sealed. Rebecca turned to David sharply. Is that true? David didn't answer immediately. Layla looked up at Jonathan. Who's Emily? Jonathan's chest ached. David finally spoke. Sometimes sealed doesn't mean inaccessible. Rebecca's voice hardened. You didn't clear this with me. David shrugged slightly. We needed leverage. The word hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Danielle stood. You don't get to scare him into taking my daughter. Rebecca stood too. David, step outside. After a tense pause, David rose and left the room. Silence followed. Rebecca looked shaken now. I'm sorry. That should not have happened. Jonathan believed her. That almost made it worse. Rebecca met his eyes. Whatever you decide, it has to be voluntary. Otherwise, we stop this path. Layla whispered, if I stay with you, does that mean my mom disappears? Jonathan knelt in front of her, heart pounding. No. It means we make noise until she doesn't. Layla studied him, then nodded once. Jonathan stood and faced Rebecca. I'll do it, he said quietly. On one condition. Rebecca exhaled. Name it. No secrecy, Jonathan said. No manipulation. And Danielle is part of every step. Rebecca nodded. Agreed. The door opened. David stepped back in, his expression unreadable. Rebecca turned to him. We're proceeding with temporary kinship placement. David glanced at Jonathan, eyes cool. Congratulations. Jonathan didn't respond. As they walked out, Layla slipped her hand into Jonathan's again. Her grip was tight. And for the first time, Jonathan understood the full weight of what he'd just agreed to. He hadn't saved her yet. He'd stepped directly into the storm. The first night was the hardest. Jonathan brought Layla to his apartment just after sunset. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel too loud. The elevator ride stretched on, Layla standing stiff beside him, backpack clutched to her chest like a life vest. "This is just for now," Jonathan said, "not for the first time." Layla nodded. "I know." But her eyes kept moving. The walls, the lights, the unfamiliar doors. When they stepped inside, Layla froze. The apartment was clean, almost too clean. Neutral colors. Sharp lines. Everything had a place, and none of those places felt like they belonged to a child. Jonathan noticed immediately. "You can put your things anywhere," he said quickly. "We'll figure it out." Layla took a few cautious steps in, touching the edge of the couch, the back of a chair, like she was testing whether it was real. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, glowing and distant. "It's high," she said. "Yeah," Jonathan replied. "Does that bother you?" She shook her head. "It just means no one can hear if you cry." The words landed quietly and stayed there. Jonathan cleared his throat. "You hungry?" Layla hesitated. "Am I allowed to be?" He knelt in front of her. "You never need permission to be hungry." She studied his face, searching for the trick. Finding none, she nodded. They ordered takeout. Layla ate slowly, watching him the whole time, as if waiting for the moment he'd tell her she'd had enough. It never came. Later, Jonathan showed her the spare room. Fresh sheets, a lamp, a stack of folded towels. Layla stood in the doorway. "This is mine." "Yes," Jonathan said. "For now." She nodded, then asked quietly, "Can I sleep with the light on?" "Of course." "And the door open?" "Yes." "And can you say good night?" Jonathan swallowed. "I can do that." When she finally climbed into bed, she pulled the blanket up to her chin, eyes still open. "You're not leaving, right?" she asked. "I'll be right here," he said. She nodded, but her grip tightened on the blanket. Jonathan stepped back into the hallway, closing the door just enough. He leaned against the wall, heart pounding. This wasn't theory anymore. This was real. The next days blurred together. School drop-offs. Meetings with CPS. Danielle's visits, supervised at first, tense and heavy with unsaid fear. Layla clung to her mother every time they met, then clung to Jonathan when it was time to separate. "You coming back tomorrow?" Layla asked every time. "Yes," Danielle promised every time. But Jonathan could hear the strain beneath her voice. At night, Layla had nightmares. She'd wake up crying without sound, eyes wide, breath shallow. Jonathan would sit on the edge of her bed, not touching unless she reached first. "Am I still your responsibility?" she asked once, half asleep. Jonathan brushed hair from her forehead. "Yes." She nodded and fell back asleep. "You didn't?" On the fourth day, Rebecca called. "There's been a complaint," she said. Jonathan felt his shoulders tense. "From who?" "David," Rebecca admitted. "He's questioning whether this placement was appropriate." Jonathan laughed softly. "Of course he is." "He claims you're too emotionally involved," Rebecca said. Jonathan didn't deny it. Rebecca sighed. "I'm pushing back. But he's escalating." "How?" Jonathan asked. "There's talk of moving Layla to a licensed foster home," Rebecca said carefully. "To remove ambiguity." Jonathan's chest tightened. "That would destroy her." "I know," Rebecca said. "But I need something concrete." "What?" Jonathan asked. "A long-term plan," Rebecca said. "Stability. Permanence." Jonathan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Permanence. That word carried weight. Legal weight. Emotional weight. A weight he'd spent years avoiding. "I can't lose her," Jonathan said quietly. Rebecca paused. "Then you need to decide what you're willing to become." That evening, Danielle came for her visit. Layla ran to her, burying her face in Danielle's coat. Danielle held her tightly, eyes wet, jaw clenched. "You okay here?" Danielle asked Layla softly. Layla hesitated, then nodded. "He keeps the light on." Danielle looked at Jonathan. "Thank you." Jonathan nodded. "She's brave." Danielle smiled sadly. "She shouldn't have to be." When it was time to leave, Layla clung harder than usual. "Don't forget me," she whispered. Danielle pulled back, eyes fierce. "Never." After Danielle left, Layla grew quiet. Too quiet. Jonathan found her sitting on the floor of her room, backpack open, carefully arranging her few belongings. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Getting ready," she said. "For what?" She looked up at him, eyes steady but scared. "In case they move me again." Jonathan's heart broke open. He sat down across from her. "Layla, listen to me." She paused, watching his face. "I don't make promises lightly," he said. "And I don't keep children halfway." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Jonathan said slowly, "that if they try to move you, they won't just be moving you away from me." Her breath caught. "They'll be fighting me," he finished. Layla stared at him, something like hope flickering dangerously in her eyes. Outside, Jonathan's phone buzzed with an incoming email. Subject: Emergency Review, Placement Adjustment. He didn't open it yet. He stayed right there on the floor, across from a little girl who was packing her life into a backpack again. And for the first time, Jonathan knew exactly what the final fight would cost him. He just didn't know yet if it would be enough. The early morning sun sliced through the blinds, casting stripes across the floor. Jonathan hadn't slept. Layla had finally dozed off around 3 a.m., but he couldn't. His mind was racing. Legal procedures, potential opposition, and the unspoken threat from David that still lingered like smoke in a room after a fire. The email from last night glared at him on his phone. Emergency Review, Placement Adjustment. He hesitated before opening it, knowing the words inside could change everything. Inside, the message was clinical, almost cold. Due to ongoing concerns, Layla Brooks' placement is under review. Immediate meeting required at 10 a.m. Bring all relevant parties. CPS will determine next steps. Jonathan closed his eyes. Immediate review. Determination. The phrasing left no room for negotiation, no space for consideration of feelings or trust. He looked at Layla sleeping in her bed, small chest rising and falling steadily, peaceful for once. A protective instinct surged through him. He realized, in a way he hadn't before, that he wasn't just protecting her from the system. He was protecting her from a world that had repeatedly failed her. At the CPS office, tension hung in the air like thick fog. Danielle arrived first, eyes red-rimmed but resolute. Layla held her hand tightly as they walked to the waiting room. Jonathan followed behind, feeling every weight of responsibility pressing on him. Rebecca greeted them with a nod. "Thank you all for arriving promptly. This review is urgent. We need to ensure we explore every option for Layla's well-being." Jonathan wanted to retort, to remind her that well-being meant more than forms and checklists. He kept his silence. David entered last. He didn't smile. His eyes scanned the room carefully, landing on Jonathan with a subtle challenge. The meeting began. Rebecca outlined the case notes, Layla's progress, her schooling, Danielle's efforts, and Jonathan's temporary placement. Each point was meticulous, clinical, almost as if reading from a script. Then Rebecca paused. "Before we proceed with recommendations, we need Jonathan Reed to state his intentions regarding the placement." Jonathan's throat went dry. He looked at Layla. She squeezed Danielle's hand and glanced up at him, waiting. "I intend to maintain her placement with me," he said slowly, deliberately, "as long as it's temporary and Danielle remains involved. No secrecy, no manipulation. She stays connected with her mother, and I won't allow her to be moved out of the district or into an unfamiliar foster setting unnecessarily." Rebecca's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. David's jaw tightened. "And if concerns arise?" Rebecca asked. "Then we face them directly," Jonathan said. "We don't punish the child to control the adults." Silence filled the room. Then David cleared his throat. "You understand this could escalate. You're aware, Mr. Reed, that opposing recommendations can lead to legal scrutiny and oversight." Jonathan didn't flinch. "I understand. But this isn't a legal issue for me. It's a moral one." Rebecca sighed. "We'll take that into consideration. The review will reflect your commitment and her mother's involvement." The meeting ended, but tension lingered. Outside, the city felt colder than usual, gray clouds hanging low over streets that seemed indifferent to the lives inside office buildings. Jonathan escorted Danielle and Layla back to the car. Layla held his hand tightly, and Danielle hugged her before they left. "Thank you," Danielle whispered, eyes bright with relief, "for not letting her feel like she's alone." Jonathan nodded. "She's not alone. Not ever." Layla looked up at him, small eyes shining with trust. "You didn't let them take me," she said softly. Jonathan smiled faintly, heart swelling. "Not today." That night, back in the apartment, Jonathan tucked Layla into bed. He left the light on as requested, the door slightly ajar, and sat on the floor beside her. "Good night," he whispered. "Good night, Mr. Jonathan," Layla replied, her small voice steady despite the day's tension. He stayed until her breathing evened, watching over her like a sentinel. For the first time since their journey began, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this storm together. The phone buzzed once more, a text from Rebecca. "Placement approved. Monitoring continues, but immediate concerns addressed. You've shown the balance of care and responsibility necessary." Jonathan stared at the screen, then at Layla sleeping peacefully. Relief washed over him, tempered with the knowledge that the system wasn't perfect, that storms would return. But for now the fight was over and she was safe. He exhaled slowly. And for the first time in years he allowed himself to hope. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and luminous. Inside, a little girl slept safely, a mother breathed easier, and a man who had once avoided attachments realized he had found the one thing he never expected: purpose in protecting someone else's life. And Jonathan knew, whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm had passed, but the bond forged in fear, trust, and quiet resilience would last far longer than any of them could have anticipated.